found out at the hospital that my daughters had both passed away.
Loved her children. She loved them more than life.
She's a bee and killed those babies. Those were the words of the next door neighbor, Shirley Brandon, whose testimony was a key piece of evidence in convicting Angela Garcia. In the most harrowing cases that Cleveland has witnessed, the murder of two toddlers aged 2 and 3 will go down in the history books. After all, Naima and Nija were allegedly burned alive by their biological mother, Garcia. The complex case of Angela Garcia goes back to 1999. Now, the developments in the fire investigation is telling a story that has shocked everyone. New evidence suggests Garcia was wrongfully convicted, and as the Innocent Project vouches for the mother, prosecutors want the jury to rule the death of the toddlers as more than just an accident. But Angela's case has a lot to answer for. You see, on November the 20th, 1999, Garcia and her two daughters were home during dinner time. Their house on Harvard Avenue was a two-story structure that Angela intended to buy once she got married to her fiancé, Mario Watkins. And just like any other single mother, she also intended to give her children a secure home and a happy life. By the way, fellas, remember, happy wife, happy life. But Angela would take an unfortunate phone call on the same day, and her life was changed forever. Police reports show that Garcia was on a three-way phone call with her sister and mother when her daughters were caught into the fire. Minutes later, Garcia was coughing and her throat started to tighten up. That's when she knew something was wrong. Motherly instinct kicked in and she rushed downstairs to fetch her girls. It was a struggle. A huge gush of flames couldn't let her pass the stairway. To make matters worse, the raging fire had caught onto the main switchboard, and other than the blaze, the house was pitch black. But Garcia wasn't to give up. She gathered her daughters in the bedroom and looked for an escape. But the fire was wild, and as the lights had gone out, she couldn't see her girls in the room. As per her statement, she had lost her babies in the room. For the Cleveland Police Department, that major chunk of events seemed almost made up. How do you lose your two daughters in a room that you had placed them in? Yet, like many other instances in this twisted case, this question also went unanswered. But at that moment, Garcia had only one option. She broke the window glass and exited the house using the porch window. The struggling mother had jumped off the roof to call her neighbors for help, particularly Shirley Brandon. Shirley was on the phone when she heard Garcia's waiting pleas for help. As soon as she heard her neighbor's house was on fire and her babies were inside, Shirley and her sister made a run to help. They called 911, but it was too late. The house was falling apart under the devastating fire. Shirley recalled that it seemed like the fire had a face and it would gulp down everything in its way. The firefighters were quick to enter the room, only to come out with the dead bodies of Naima and Nija, who had clung to the windows trying to escape. The records from the court show that both toddlers were severely burned, but their cause of death was inhaling smoke. And now, what I'm about to tell you is going to make your heart stop. If instances about fire make you uncomfortable, you might want to skip the next part. The firefighter who had made a run to save Garcia's daughters told the jury that he had found the two girls in the master bedroom. So far, the mother's story about taking her girls to the bedroom checks out. After all, that's where the girls were found. But what the firefighter revealed next is horrifying. According to him, both Naima and Nija were found around the same window that Garcia had used to escape. The eldest daughter, Naima, had clung to the window trying to break it open as her younger sister was nearby. All evidence showed that she was trying to escape the burning house, just like she had seen her mother doing so. But she was only 3, and to break the glass wasn't an easy feat. She got tangled up in the window blinds, which melted around her small frame. When the firefighter recalled his story in front of the jury, many questions popped up. How could a mother leave her daughters behind? Why didn't she make a run for her daughters after breaking the window? Why didn't she take Naima's warning seriously? That's insane if you think about it. In other words, in the bedroom, they found the children, right? Think about this. The child's trying to escape, trying to get out, and they were burned alive on the windowsill, basically. Wow. At this moment in the story, how do you feel about Angela Garcia so far? Let me know. It appeared during the story, Shirley might have had some answers. You see, according to her, Garcia wasn't exactly phased about leaving her daughters behind. She said that she seemed like a crackhead who had started to see her girls as a burden after meeting her fiance, Mario Watkins. Sure, other neighbors were already suspicious of Angela and her commitment as a mother, but it was Shirley who was hellbound in accusing the mother of the heinous crimes. In her statement, she recalled that as the house burned down, Angela wasn't exactly taking harsh measures to save her daughters. In fact, she only mentioned Naima and Nija when Shirley asked about their whereabouts. To add fuel to the fire that was raging against Angela, the next door neighbor hadn't seen any broken windows either, which meant one thing: the fire was arson. The mother had burned down the house from the outside and only ran for help as a ruse. When Shirley Brandon asked her, "How did you get out?" she said, "I don't know, I just ran out." This particular statement was recorded by the police in all caps, and that's how you know things weren't looking too bright for Angela Garcia. Even when the investigation was in preliminary stages, Garcia's alleged motive became clear cut, and it was in line with everything the neighbors had been saying about her. As per her neighbors and distant relatives, she had a very lucrative incentive to burn her house down, building, and her children were insured. Getting that huge chunk of money would have given her a chance to start a new life with Mario without any extra baggage lying around. Police's suspicions took a sharp turn when the causes behind the fire became more and more apparent. The initial police investigations had ruled out the fire as a tragic, unfortunate accident. The chief investigator, Lugo, did see some unexplained patterns in the fire. But since Pyra, the sniffing dog, couldn't find any ignitable liquid, he ruled out the unexplainable as a mere coincidence. Kind of confusing, right? Well, you see, back in 1999, only junk science was the way to go about. Lugo had found a gaping hole in the dining room which could have been the source of the fire. But there's two conflicting stories here. Some people close to Garcia report that she had a knack for lighting scented candles in the evening. While her neighbors were quite fixated on one story, Angela was about to have a nice romantic candlelight dinner with Mario. Lugo didn't exactly care about why a huge candle was left unsupervised in a house of toddlers. It seemed like the police weren't interested in asking hard-hitting questions. But Cleveland's fire department had an entire questionnaire doubting Garcia's line of events. First things first, the chief investigator was interested in the alleged broken window glass. Like Shirley, the chief was also suspicious about when and how the window broke open. According to the preliminary findings, the break in glass was too small and clean for Garcia to escape. So according to the evidence so far, the way she claimed she escaped was impossible. Not to mention, she had no visible cuts or injuries on her arms or legs, which would have been viable for anyone jumping off the roof or struggling through a sharp, broken glass. The chief's reading of the event was in the following words. He said, "There were no other obvious injuries, cuts, bruises, burns or tears to her clothing. All these facts together indicate that Angela did not exit the house through the second floor windows. And that is not the only thing. The chief and the police also noticed that Angela seemed almost cheerful in the hospital, if not mildly upset. Now that was enough to set off Lugo. It just didn't feel right that a mother whose two children were burned alive can't possibly live with a cool demeanor, isn't it? But then the evidence kept piling against Garcia. It was almost like her case had become an obsession for Patton. He wanted to hold something responsible for the tragic deaths of Naima and Nija, Patton being the chief, and there was no stopping him. Patton's investigation started off with the weakest link, Mario Watkins. Like any other crime, you start with the ones closest to the suspect. Now, the mystified fiance wasn't exactly a suspect, but the police suspected he was acting out in love. His loyalty to his soon to be bride was almost contagious, and he did not have anything but elaborate praises to sing in Garcia's name. But the facts wouldn't lie. Watkins knew that his fiancée had bought a renter's insurance policy, and the very same day she was sorting out to transfer the custody of her kids. You see, both of her children had two different fathers, and they seemed pretty out of the picture. As per Mario, Garcia had no money problems thanks to her family support. She was a good mother and whatnot. However, for days, he refused to sign his testimony despite repeated assurances that she isn't a suspect. So he claims she's got money. But there was a theory from the police she did this to get money, the insurance money. So who's speaking the truth and who's telling porkies? Only when the chief threatened to charge him with obstruction of justice, he caved. It was a statement that gave the investigators a realistic description of the candle, and then the police set out to lay their findings. Their evidence suggested the candle was firmly placed on a spiked candle stand. So Lugo's initial guess that one of the two girls had toppled the candle down simply did not stand. And like the dominoes cascading in a line, every shard of innocence that Garcia had went down the drain. The worst was to come though. Patton worked closely with ADT Home Security Services, the agency that was covering Angela Garcia's house on Harvard Avenue. Their records were groundbreaking in the investigation. It turned out someone had definitely tampered with the fire alarm. Now a 2 and a 3-year-old couldn't exactly enter the tamper code, and the house was empty other than the children and their mother. All fingers pointed towards the only adult in the house. 3 minutes after the code was entered, ADT had called the residence. The person who picked up the phone was silent for 12 minutes, and the phone operator could only hear heavy breathing. Such events were enough to incriminate Garcia. Yet it was her phone records that were the final nail in her coffin. The record showed that before the house caught fire, Garcia had ended her 3-way phone call with her mom and sister 15 minutes prior. That's plenty enough time to knock off a candle, burn down your house, and make your escape, right? Well, that was the police's thoughts anyway. Personally, I find it stupid, but I'll come on to that later. The phone record was just more solid proof to the theory that police were already considering Garcia had escaped from the front door after lighting the matchstick. The case of Naima and Nija went from undetermined to incendiary in police records, and Angela Garcia was arrested on the counts of arson and murder of her 2 innocent daughters. But a series of turbulent events was about to come. The house on Harvard Avenue was on its way to become a story of a forced plea deal, junk science, a woman wrongfully convicted, and the crimes of Cleveland. For a case that only gave the perception of discovering strong incriminating evidence, everything was about to fall apart, including the credibility of the case officers. From the very start, Angela Garcia versus the state was about to be a flop. There's no way the evidence would be able to find the mother guilty of any crimes. But all hopes were crushed and washed away when Garcia, in her wavering, shaking, and quivering voice, pleaded guilty on all accounts of murder. Everyone in the courthouse was in a turmoil. How come a mother who had spent days vouching for her innocence was suddenly guilty? And this is where the Innocent Project comes in. The organization is committed to exonerating innocents who were wrongfully convicted, and the project is pushing for the release of Angela Garcia, who according to the project is a victim of biases and mistrial. The Innocence Project also provides an explanation as to why Garcia felt compelled to plead guilty in the court of law. According to the prosecutors associated with the project, arson convicts like Garcia only agree to the state's plea deal to avoid the death penalty or long sentences. In the United States, more than 95% of the convictions happen because of a plea deal and not the conclusive evidence indicating guilt. Is Garcia also a victim of a forced plea deal and wrongful conviction? The odds are insurmountable. It's very likely that Angela's confession of guilt was her only way to avoid a death penalty. Not to mention, after Innocent Project activists prompted for a fair reading of the fire using new scientific advancements, the state's entire case cracked under pressure. Angela's lawyers are still asking one really important question. Why did prosecutors never explain how Garcia set the fire in the first place? This brings me back to the candle. How many true crime stories have you seen? I've done a few on women who have murdered their children in some kind of fire, right? But a candle? I mean, if you're going to try and burn your house down, just burn it down, right? Nobody's in the house, you just want to burn it down. You're not going to think of a candle, maybe electrics, maybe the stove, but not a candle. To me, that is just a bullshit explanation. In fact, prosecutors have never explained the cause of the fire. Their only shred of conclusive proof was the candle theory and that someone had picked up the call from ADT. Other than that, the state's evidence was highly circumstantial. Sure, she had brought the rental insurance policy, but even the seller claimed that Garcia wasn't exactly interested in purchasing. Plus, the state's prosecutor had convinced the jury that the mother was highly ambitious to join the Navy as a 23-year-old. But when her screening process revealed that she can't do the service due to her two dependent children, she tried for her sister to adopt them. So the prosecutors claimed this policy and also this idea that she wanted to join the Navy was enough of a motive for a mother to burn down her house as well as her two daughters? Nah, that's a bit silly if you ask me. New evidence suggested that such claims are not only bogus but perhaps motivated by racial discrimination. You see, the state couldn't conjure up one single piece of evidence suggesting that Garcia was a bad mother. Her daughters were in perfect health, and the phone record showed that on the day of the fire, she had called Nija's doctor due to bad coughing. Now, if she was about to kill her own daughters, then why would she go to the extra mile to call the doctor regarding a cough? I mean, medical bills are not cheap, but it seems she did what she could. But the biggest twist in the story comes from the credibility of Patton, the fire chief, who had nailed the crime on Angela Garcia quite perfectly. The investigation revealed that his methodology to investigate the fire was just junk science. Let us put these events fair and square. Not only did the chief rely on pseudoscience, not only did he sell his story to the jury, but he also put an innocent woman behind bars. I want to come on to a quick separate point before I continue. As a prosecutor, right? I told you earlier the candle theory is kind of stupid. Why are prosecutors so adamant on getting that dub? When I say dub, I mean conviction. Like, imagine as a prosecutor, far more experienced than me, you know the law better than me. But imagine using a candle theory. It's like, bruv, how dumb are you? It seems to me the prosecutor cared more about getting a conviction, advancing their career, being part of the who's who in the law world, and they were willing to sacrifice this woman's life? That's crazy. A new investigation suggests that the fire chief was hardly an expert in arson or crimes, and what he knew just came from his intuition and photographs of the crime scene. If this was the case from a year back, any jury wouldn't have taken that seriously. But in the 90s, things were different. The chief's argument of finding Garcia guilty was based on alligatoring, a methodology used to investigate fires. Large alligator-type patterns in a burnt building somehow suggested the presence of an ignitable liquid. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it's a good measure because it's junk science. In 92, such methodology was declared to be mythical, outdated, and unreliable. Even though Garcia's entire case was built on the science of alligatoring, no one actually thought of pulling the old files from the box and reopening the investigation. It makes sense why the Innocents and other projects want to reinvestigate the cases of arson that were investigated without any scientific background. In this case, the state expert Ralph Dolance blindly supported the chief's whirlwind of explanations without visiting the crime scene ever. Wait, what? While the state's case seemed hollow now, there are two durable key pieces of evidence in their investigation. First, the mother of the children doesn't have a singular account of how she escaped the fire. One of her neighbors testified that Garcia had told that she escaped through the front door. In another record, she broke the window's glass through her foot, in another through her hand. Another damning evidence suggests that Angela was successful in committing insurance fraud through dodging the real prices of her inventory. But there's still some inconsistencies though. She didn't collect any claim damages on her daughter's behalf. Even then, the state continued to rely on its file of evidence, including a tip they got from a known jail snitch, Tonya Lanham. See, back in 2001, the state had already changed its story on how the fire was set ablaze, and somehow that was enough to convict Angela for 2 life sentences. It was only in 2015 when she earned a rare evidentiary hearing. Yet all attempts were in vain. in 2016 when the judge asked Angela Garcia to choose between a fourth trial or admitting to arson and involuntary manslaughter. Fearful of going to prison for life or facing another mistrial, she agreed to the latter. In other words, the judge said, "All right, I'm going to put your sentence at 22 years, at which she had already served 17 years. So, to summarize the story, some fire broke out. The police say she did it, the mother did it because of some candle, and then she was told, "All right, I don't know what's going on, but either you go to jail for the rest of your life or just admit that you did it and we'll sentence you to 22 years. I'm no expert, but a person's profile says a lot. If the report suggests that she took care of her children were well fed, they were too young for school, but if they were fed, clothed, and she was with them all the time, that's a sign of a competent mother. How many true crime stories have you seen where the child is starving or the child is abused, etc., etc.? This was not the case with Angela. You see what I mean? There's a pattern of behavior that makes you think one way or the other. And to me, she seemed like a good mom. Her not knowing how she came out of the house, yeah, that's kind of weird. And again, I don't believe the fire started from a candle. So then how did the fire start? Who knows? Either way, what do you think about the outcome of this case? Let me know.